Merry meet, folks. This is Willow. I'm doing a video this morning on the aloe plant, which is one of my very favorite house plants. I've got quite a bit of notes to share, and I'm kind of going to condense those into short little subtopics, one on history, one on medicinal use, and one on the magical properties. And so that's the way I'm going to do it. Hopefully you'll find some of it, if not most of it, helpful, relevant, interesting, all of the above, something like that. Aloe is probably one of the most familiar plants to everybody. A lot of us have it in our homes. My great-grandmother referred to it as the burn plant, and you may refer to it as a burn plant too. That's another common name for it. It's not a cactus. A lot of people think that an aloe plant belongs to the cactus family, but it is in fact a lily in terms of its classification in its family. It is a succulent. It's mostly water, like us. Something like 90% of this plant is water, and so that obviously connects it to the moon and lunar magic. We'll get to that later on. First, I'm going to talk about the history of it. This is a plant that was one of the very first plants ever to be talked about in recorded history and writings from different cultures like Sumeria, Egypt, even the Christian Bible. And so it has a place in history firmly secured as right from the get-go as a useful plant. The Chinese and Egyptians used this plant to prepare the body whenever it comes time for burial or for mummification. In fact, Queen Nefertiti and Queen Cleopatra used it to preserve, or used it for their skin, not to preserve their skin. I'm talking about while they're living. They used it as like part of their beauty regime, which I think is quite interesting. It was always known to be something that could be helpful to healing the skin as well. In fact, Alexander the Great, who was Greek in origin, his teacher was Aristotle, whose teacher was Plato, whose teacher was Socrates, told him about the aloe plant, and he used it for wounded soldiers after the battles and things like that. He would have aloe plants distributed and applied to their wounds and things like that. In fact, he even made a special point to conquer, invade, occupy an island in the Indian Ocean called Socotra, which has lots of wild aloe plants, and they're really big there. And this was for the sole purpose of acquiring these plants to help his men after a battle. So I think that's pretty interesting. Fast forward a little bit, the Japanese used it as a treatment for radiation poisoning after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And they actually had, a good compare-contrast scenario, not planned, I don't think, but they could check and see the progress of those who were using aloe and their rate of recovery and their skin healing and all of that compared to those who didn't use aloe, their rate of recovery and skin healing. And it was clear that in that study that the aloe plant sped the healing and made the healing much less scarred, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So that's a big, a big or good example of how the aloe plant has proven its worth in modern times. In the Bible, I mentioned that, and I'm not saying this to preach to you, but from a historical perspective, I think it's pretty interesting that the aloe was mentioned 5 times in the Bible. The most popular mention is after the crucifixion of Jesus, when I think it was Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate to have possession of Jesus' body so that he could give it to the women, I believe, to have it buried according to the Jewish faith's customs. And so he allows them to do this, and Joseph of Arimathea, I think, gives the body then to Nicodemus, and Nicodemus is the one who does this before the women have access to the body for burial, and he applies something like a total of 100 pounds of aloes with an E or with an S on it, and myrrh to the body before it's prepared for burial. I think that's pretty interesting. That's a lot of aloe, 100 pounds or so. So, and the other mentions of it are really, in the Bible, are really fleeting mentions of it being a part of a list of other items or part of gift or something like that. Okay, so that's, I think, the most interesting points from the history that I kind of gathered for my little research of this. The medical properties or medicinal uses are quite extensive. In fact, there's so many here, I'm going to have to kind of go through it quicker than I would, because that's not what this video is about. It's just the simple, medicinal properties of this plant. Okay, so some of these are more well known. For instance, we'll start off talking about it's used often for sunburn and gels and things like that. But it's also used for cuts and scrapes and skinned knees and elbows and things like that. Your minor injuries, those that you get as a child or you get monkeying around in your yard like I do. It's good for that, and we use it for that and have for generations. Here in the South, probably everywhere in the United States that's the case. One thing that I think is important, though, is when you start talking about taking aloe internally as opposed to putting it on your skin and that sort of thing, the approved medicinal uses of it become much more skimpy. In other words, a lot of the uses that history has told us are good uses for this plant, modern medicine says, hold off on that. WebMD, for instance, lists a lot of possible uses for this plant, but they're giving it a blanket statement of you shouldn't try this, you shouldn't do this at home, because there's only some evidence that says that this works, and there are possible side effects. It can be used for constipation, and was for years, as a ingesting the juice or ingesting a gel form of it. But now they say that's very dangerous to do, because it really go overboard in that area and cause diarrhea. And if you're pregnant, it can cause cramping and spasms that may even bring about, early labor. So you've got to be careful with taking it internally. I know a lot of health food stores have aloe that you can drink, have a version of a juice or something like that. And I don't know much about that, so I'm not obviously an expert on any kind of medicine or doctoring, as we call it around here. So use your own common sense and do your own research, and of course listen to your doctor and see a doctor if you've got serious medical problems that you're trying to treat with this, this herb. I would hold off on that and get the medical attention, the traditional, modern medicine treatment before going back to the herbal remedies. So that's my little disclaimer. All right, so what else could it be used for? There's some evidence category on WebMD says it even includes sunburn there as some evidence for healing for sunburn. Diaper rash, gingivitis, frostbite, dry skin, hepatitis, high cholesterol, insect repellent, especially for sand fleas and other fleas. And it says apply this to your feet or around your ankles with jojoba or coconut oils. Do you hear me? I almost said jojoba. That's what happens in my mind when I see that word. It can help with bed sores, dandruff, ulcerative colitis, wound healing, burns, diabetes, dental plaque, and even dry socket. The University of Maryland says that aloe was one of the most prescribed medicines of the 18th and 19th centuries. And it's proven that the active compounds found in this plant reduce pain in an open wound or something like that, or a skin problem, let me say that. It reduces pain and inflammation in a skin kind of issue, and it stimulates growth and repair, and it also moisturizes. So a great topical kind of plant. Okay, here's my percentage. I think I said a minute ago it was 90% water. It's 99% water. So this is a very lunar plant. Okay, so how would you use this? I'm not going to break open my aloe plant and show you, because I'm funny about that. I don't want to do it just for the sake of showing YouTube what the inside of an aloe plant looks like. There are lots of pictures, and I may post some pictures or something like that to give you a detail of what they look like once they're sliced, and you can see it from the side. There's like a layer of gel inside in the center that's much softer, and then there's like a sub layer of skin around that center part that's a little tougher and has a little different property. In fact, that sub layer of skin, I'm going to call it skin, can be a skin irritant for people. If you have skin sensitivities to certain plants, you might want to test that out before you go slathering it on yourself, because some people do have a reaction that causes rash and things like that, or redness, when they apply that layer to, their skin. So know how you react to this before you do it in abundance all over a hurt area or skinned area or burn. And then you have the final skin layer, which can be prickly. That's, of course, why people think cactus, because it does have spiny tendrils that come off of the each, shoot of the plant. So it's got a lot of interesting things about it, aloe. I'm really fascinated by it as a plant. It is a succulent perennial. If you live in a place that gets less than 32 degrees in the winter, then you can't keep this in the ground outside. Now, it does grow outside in the wild in places like Africa and farther towards the equator and that sort of tropical climate. But here where I live, even in the deep south, I keep it as a house plant. Now, does it go outside in the summer? Of course, I bring it out. It changes its look a little bit. If you leave it in the hot sun, you'll see mine in a minute. They have a really bright green appearance, but then they become more yellowish or tan if you leave them out in the sun, and which is good and it's okay for the plant. It just changes the look of it. And then if you leave them in that kind of climate, which is more like their natural climate, they will put out flowers. I've never seen that in my house plants because I don't let them stay out in the hot sun the way that is necessary to get those flowers. It has been recorded to grow over 3 or 4 feet tall. Somewhere in that range whenever it is in the wild. Mine usually don't get above a foot high, but to be honest, the ones I have now are all relatively young, only a couple years old or something like that. And this is a plant that can live up to 25 years or even longer. But probably the most interesting thing is that they can live infinitely if you consider that the babies they have are an extension of that mother plant. And boy, does this plant put out babies. That's why I have so many that I'm going to show you here in a second. They're everywhere in my house because they keep reproducing. All right, so as far as taking care of them, don't let them stay out in freezing weather. They do like poor soil. They like neglect. They don't like to be overwatered. I generally water them whenever it rains around here and use that as a good measurement of when they need water. If you overwater them, of course, they'll get root rot and things like that. But if you don't do well with houseplants, this is a plant that you'll probably do well with. It's not a fussy plant. It handles lots of different kinds of neglect and things like that without too much suffering. In fact, they seem to thrive with a little neglect.